Morning everybody. Hope you're well. Thanks for coming today. As Roger was saying, pensions is always at the forefront of our minds, that's for sure. It's been in the news an awful lot more than it has been at times very recently, with the news from the budget, but also, more importantly, auto enrolment. So auto enrolment really is a huge area for all employers, and as well, we really want to be able to show you how it's going to affect yourselves, what you're going to need to know about auto enrolment, but also what solutions we put in place to be able to help you through this. Okay, so very briefly, auto enrolment is something that started in 2012. So it became a place for the very largest companies, so the big banks and the supermarket chains, and it's going to continue all the way down to 2017, but actually beyond that as well, even to 2018 for any startup companies. What's going to happen is every employer is going to have a specific date when the new regulations are going to be brought in and you're going to need to adhere to them. So that's known as your staging date. I don't know if any of you would have got that. If you don't, we can help you know when that's going to be. What's going to happen is you're going to need to enrol every eligible member of your staff into a qualifying pension scheme. You're going to need to ultimately make a contribution of 3%, potentially higher depending on the way that you structure your scheme. The employees are also going to have to put a percentage in. That will be up to 5%. I'll go on to those figures in a bit more detail for you in a minute. But another really key thing is you're going to need to be making an awful lot of records. Any activity that goes on within the scheme, you're going to need to take details of, and that information is going to need to be reported to the pensions regulator on an instant basis and on an ongoing basis as well. So it's very, very important that you have the right processes in place to better make sure that this is all taken care of. Okay, so with auto enrolment, there are a number of duties and responsibilities that, as an employer, you need to adhere to, as I just mentioned. What I want to do now is look at what we see as the four main areas and go into some detail of those and explain how it's going to affect yourselves. Okay, so the four main areas we feel are providing an eligible pension scheme, communicating with staff, so there's statutory communications that have been set out by the pensions regulator that you need to adhere to, and I'll go into more detail on those. Obviously making the pension contributions, as an employer that's going to be your responsibility to do so for your staff. And again, as I mentioned, reporting to the pensions regulator. I'm going to look at each of these now on an individual basis and go into a bit more detail for you. Okay, so providing an eligible pension scheme. So every employer is going to have to put in place a qualifying workplace pension scheme. And what that means is a scheme that is going to be able to meet all the legislation that's been brought in. Now, to do that, you're going to need to be able to enrol all eligible employees without any need for them to complete any paperwork, any signatures, or any actual advice, is the view of the regulator. Those individuals are going to need to be assessed and put into that scheme, and you're going to need to be able to meet the minimum, at least, contribution figures. Now, depending on the size of your company, depends when these obligations are going to kick in for you. If we have a look here, so people with staff from 50 up to 249, then you've got a year, basically, until that's going to be in place for you. Companies with slightly smaller workforces, well, a little bit longer, you've got until October 2015. And again, for fewer than 30, we've got to April 2017. Now, to find out specifically when your date is going to be, you should have received some information from the pensions regulator explaining that already. If for any reason you haven't, we can help you there. If you can provide us with your PAYE reference, we'll be able to find out exactly when your stage date is going to be, and we can start planning towards that for you. Okay, so as I said, one of the other main duties is going to be communication. You've got statutory communications that need to be sent out by yourselves to your employees at particular times, and there is deadlines attached to each of these. So the first one is the initial communication. So this needs to go out to your staff at least a month before your staging date. And the information you're going to be providing here is an explanation of what auto enrolment is, what does this mean for them as an individual, what scheme basis have you set for your staff, what contributions are going to be provided both by you and what is their obligation for themselves should they want to become a member of this. You can make notes now, but we can forward these slides on to you, by the way, if anyone is afterwards. So that's one of the key areas that we need to be looking at. What we're also going to need to look at after the initial communication is, will you want to make any postponement? Well, what I mean by that is, when you're making contributions and you reach your staging date, within the legislation, you're allowed to make a postponement of contributions up to 3 months from that original date, that original staging date. If you decide to do that, you can do that at outset, but also you can decide to do that in the future as well for any new joiners that come into your company. So you can use it as a deferred period, basically. And so that's a maximum of 3 months. It can differ depending on certain things within the company, but like I talked about on an individual basis. Once you've decided if you're going to make a postponement or not, then once you've reached the actual date that you're going to make your first contribution, you need to send out an assessment letter. So what you'll basically be doing here is looking at your workforce and assessing them against the Auto Enrolment regulations. Do they or do they not become eligible to be automatically enrolled? If they're automatically enrolled, you will need to send out a particular kind of notification to them. If they're not eligible to be automatically enrolled, you'll send out a different notification. Depending on where they sit, that notification may or may not say that you will also make a contribution on their behalf should they decide to opt into the scheme rather than being automatically put into it. Mike is going to go into a lot more detail on this in a minute, so I'll let him do that for you. Bobby, you mentioned earlier about the fact that contracts of employment are going to need to be looked at and potentially amended in the future because of these new legislations. It's a really key fact, actually. Every company that we've worked with so far, we've had to make a number of changes to those contracts of employment. So our friends here at Eric Robinson will be delighted to help you on that should you have any need to do so. The next duty that we'll be looking at here is making pension contributions. It's not just as simple as making a pension contribution, there's a lot more that you need to look at before we even get to that stage. The first thing we need to be doing is looking at what salary definition and contribution percentages are you going to choose for your pension scheme. Now there's 4 different options that the regulator have set out, and depending on the way that you structure your pay for your staff, depends on which one of those is going to be most cost effective. What we also need to think about is, do you want to be just meeting your minimum obligations through Auto Enrolment, or are you looking at providing a pension scheme that is going to be a very valuable employee benefit, one that might help to retain and attract staff for you in the future. Once we decide what we're doing there, we then need to decide, is postponement going to be taken into consideration or not? But obviously, if you do that, that's going to change the first date that you make the pension contribution. What we then need to do for you is look at your pay reference periods. Now, this can be very different for every single company. So you could be working under a calendar month, or you might be working on a tax month, you may be paying on a monthly basis, you may be paying on a weekly basis, or something totally different. Now, depending on what way you have structured this, depending on the exact date that you're going to make your contributions. So there will need to be some quite intensive work to be able to review this and find out exactly what those dates are going to be for you. And the final thing that we need to take into consideration on contributions is opt-outs. So any individual that has automatically been enrolled into the pension scheme has the ability to opt out of the scheme should they want to. By doing that, they're no longer going to be making any pension contributions, but also that means for you as employers, you will not have to make any further contributions for your staff that make this decision either. If they make this decision within the first month from the contribution being made, then they're entitled to a refund from the pension provider. So what will happen is the pension provider will give that money back to you as the employer, and it's then your duty to pass that back on to your staff in the following month's pay. So you can see that there's quite a lot of processes here which you could easily come unstuck on. So it's really very important that you have the right robust and repeatable processes in place, using the right systems to be able to make and record all this information, so you don't fall foul of any of the qualifications. Okay, and with that regard, we also then have obviously the pensions regulator, as I mentioned to you. They are governing everything that we've got with regards to Auto Enrolment. They're going to be keeping a very close eye on all employers, and if there are mistakes made and they're repeated, then there's potential for fines and further enforcement. And again, Mike will touch on that in a lot more detail for you in a minute. But what you're going to need to do is, once you've set up your scheme and you've staged, you then have 5 months in which to register your scheme with the pension regulator. So you go online, they have a system, you go online and you have to input specific information about the way you've set your scheme up, who's in the scheme, did you use postponement, what pension contribution percentage you chose to go with. So there's an awful lot of information they're going to want. So they take that at the outset. But then, on an ongoing basis, you're also going to continue to file scheme returns. Now, depending on the size of the scheme, depends how regularly you need to do that. If you've got a scheme of less than 12 members, then you will only need to put the scheme return in every 3 years. The information they're going to be looking for there will be the assets within the pension scheme, the members that are in the pension scheme, any leavers, and any opt-outs. So again, you can see that you're going to need to keep an awful lot of records on any activity within the scheme, so you can supply this information when it's necessary. If you've got a scheme that has got members over and above 12 people, then you have the same obligations, but you're going to need to forward that on a yearly basis instead. So that was a quick understanding there of some of the duties that we entail. I'll pass you over to Mike now, who's going to talk to you about workforce assessment.
Thanks, Ian.
Thanks.
Yeah, he's not here today.